I titled this talk Bulldozers and Anthills, and this is kind of random, but I think you'll understand why at the end of it. So I live in New York, and I spend a lot of time here. Maybe this is the anthill reference, I don't know yet. But when you're in the subway and you spend a lot of time in the subway, there's one thing that you're really concerned about is the security and the safety of that system. And the MTA actually is concerned about this too. And I'm going to start my talk with a story about a failure. And in the end, this is about success, but there's the MTA set out after the 2005 bombings in London to make a much more secure subway system. And the way they did that was they imagined a science fiction style surveillance system that they contracted from Lockheed Martin, which is one of the world's largest defense contractors. And Lockheed Martin promised that they were able to make this system that could watch people without human intervention, that used artificial intelligence to interpret whether something on the subway platform was a threat or benign. And they installed a lot of cameras that looked like this. In the end, it actually never materialized, and the software, in the industry we call it vaporware. It's when somebody sells something that never actually works, and it never worked. And this is actually, in researching this, I found the hearing notes from when there was actually a lawsuit. So the MTA was out a quarter of $1 billion. They had nothing but on their hands but a bunch of unused security cameras. And I'm a technologist. I'm a software developer. I work with cameras a lot, and this really confused me. It raised the question where if a huge company like Lockheed Martin with over 100,000 employees, many of them developers, can't create this future, this science fiction, who can, and where will this sort of discovery come from? And as a software developer, I read a lot of science fiction, and especially this guy Bruce Sterling. I don't know if many of you have heard of him, but he actually calls himself more of a design fiction author because he thinks about the future of products and the future of technology, and he's really famous for being able to make up words that then become a reality later. One of the things he made up with his co-author William Gibson is the word cyberspace, and he made that up before the internet. So when he talks, people listen, because, especially technologists, because they kind of want to create the future that he's imagining, or at least be informed by the way that he might see something. And I'm going to show you a talk that I heard in person from the Vimeo Awards Festival here in New York in 2010. And here he was talking about what cameras in the future might look like.
They would look something like this microphone, except probably a lot smaller. And this thing here, the head of the microphone, would be the lens. Except it's not a lens. It's just a piece of black fabric or glass. It's an absorptive surface that simply absorbs every photon that touches it from any angle. And then in order to take a picture, I simply tell the system to calculate what that picture would have looked like from that angle at that moment. You see? I just send it as a computational problem out into the cloud wirelessly.
So this totally blew my mind. And it seems so obvious. He was saying that in the future, instead of, with like you have a phone and you take a picture of something, and you're like, oh, that's a little wrong, I take another picture. Instead, taking a picture is going to become a lot more like writing a query, like writing a search on Google, where we're sort of surrounded by image capturing, by sensors. And then we say, I wonder what the back of my head looked like in 2020 when I was writing on the New York subway system. And I would ask the system that, and it would compute the photograph. And of course that seems outlandish with the technology we have now, but he's thinking, way out. But it actually didn't end up being that long. In fact, it was 1 month later that what he was talking about came up in my mind again. And it was when this came out. It's called the Microsoft Kinect. It's a gestural video game controller. So it's kind of like the Wii, only you don't even have to touch anything. You just sort of dance around in front of your TV, and the system magically knows how you're standing and what you're doing. And you can play games like bowling games, or you can dance like Michael Jackson, and it's really fun. But because I'm a programmer and I'm a hacker, I actually haven't ever played an Xbox video game, and I'm kind of proud to say that. we were really interested in the community of people that we're in. We're really interested in, how this worked and using it for our own projects. So it wasn't long before we took that and turned it into that, and the community of open source hackers figured out how to use it ourselves. And the first thing we saw were these kind of images. And this is actually how the camera sees you. It sees you as this kind of black and white sculpture, like a sculpture moving at 30 frames a second. And what's interesting about it is that it reminded me of Bruce Sterling's hypothetical camera of the future. It was this thing where, because it existed as a 3D model, I could change the way I looked at it without actually having to touch my camera. And this, to me, it's kind of opened this door of, here's this very nascent, this very new technology, but it suggests this future that I had heard Bruce Sterling talking about. And I wanted to explore that as soon as I was, insatiably curious. So I did a reasonable thing. I asked my friend Alexander, who's a photographer, and he strapped his camera to it with rubber bands. We hooked it up to a car battery. We put it in our backpack, and then we took it to the subway system to make an art project that was sort of a way of fantasizing about what this failed Lockheed Martin contract, what that system could have looked like. And so, he was taking photographs while I was clicking the wireless mouse, and one of the things that was fun about this experience was we thought that with this really suspicious bag of wires that people would be skeptical, but the only people that came up to us were this group of video game bros who thought that, wondered what we were doing with an Xbox in the subway. So it kind of defied our expectations too of people's suspicion, wow, maybe this place isn't very secure. And the images we captured, when we took them back to the studio, they looked like this. And the thing I loved about this was it was a partial reality, and it made people look like they were from a video game. And it felt like a natural way of representing, the way that we live in our day and age in this very digital, very connected life that we live. But then again, also, in this new type of portraiture, I could use the same tools that we used to make computer graphics, movies like Toy Story, but to manipulate images that are actually taken from a camera. And I could take an image like this that was taken at one moment and then look at it again from a different angle. And it started again to hint at the possibility that Bruce had suggested. So we threw these up online without thinking about it, and they got picked up by a lot of art blogs and kind of posted around. And actually this was the beginning of really what I see as my new media art career, was just kind of by accident by posting these photos online. And the reason that's significant is it spoke to a large group of people that were also curious about this, who were seeing the same trend and the same motion of technology, and they wanted to play too. And I think one of the hardest things about being a programmer is that it's hard to share what you're working on because there's such a large barrier to entry. But there's less of a barrier to entry when it comes to software tools, things that people can use with this user interface, like an iPhone app or like a word processor. So, like I said, this was kind of the beginning of my art career, and after this, I started doing a lot more residencies. And one of those residencies was at Carnegie Mellon University at the Studio for Creative Inquiry. And there, I met a collaborator named Jonathan Menard, and we decided to take this to the next level. He was a filmmaker, he is a filmmaker, and I'm a programmer and media artist, and we had so much in common, and we saw so much potential in this future technology that we built what we call the RGBD Toolkit. And this toolkit it's open source hardware and it's open source software. So the way to connect the cameras together, as well as software that you run on your computer to make these kind of images. And the fun part about it is that we released this totally open source for people to start experimenting with without needing to know code. So from that, we've seen a huge sort of a response from people making, this is from our website, making all their own films, experimenting with different ways, making music videos and home movies and these kind of things. And I want to show you 3 of these that I think really stand out to me, just small clips. The first is a family portrait, and I love this one because it's right where the Xbox Kinect should be, in your living room looking at your couch, but instead of playing a video game, this family is having like a family moment together and creating a portrait. So I thought that was really poignant. This was basically a promotional or devotional resource made by a megachurch for large displays in a megachurch corporation, or not corporation, but a congregation. And this was some weird sex tape, which actually is abstractly beautiful sometimes. I chose a more appropriate moment, but so we kind of had, immediately we ran the gamut. We had banality of a family portrait and a home movie, and this like reverence, and also this like hedonist activity, all being represented in this new format, because people feel like it speaks to our time. But it's important as an artist as well as a technologist to be pushing the technology and creating my own work. So that's where it comes to this film that I'm working on called Clouds. So, like I said, Jonathan and I met at this residency, and he was, as a documentarian, he was tasked with interviewing the other residents there. And as we just sort of made this breakthrough, this discovery of this filmmaking system, we thought, what better way to document the residents than to film them talking about how they made an emerging technology possible in the format itself. So we began collecting these interviews, and now we've actually amassed a definitive collection of artists who use code speaking about their process, and we hope to bring that to the world in an interactive format. But I want to show you an excerpt from this forthcoming film.
And he is basically explaining how the database works. And he said that there's one point here, and then you go around, and then there's another audio sample there, and another one there, and because this is closer, this is the one which is matched. It's like, and he explains everything like that.
Is there an experience, a digital experience that you desire to have?
Oh yes, teletransportation. Yeah, that's yeah. There are many things. Yeah, there there are many things. Okay, there's some I shouldn't talk about. But yeah, teletransportation. It's because you know there was a time when they say, well, with video conferences you won't need to meet, but they don't work so well. You still need to be with the people to really discuss and work on projects. You can do part of it by video conferences, but it has its limits. So it means I have to travel. I'm sick of traveling. I lose so much time in airport and waiting for trains, and I cannot work. So I wish teletransportation. Is it possible? Is it going to be possible? I really want that.
You could start off with the point cloud of this, and then, I don't know, at some point when I say talking about water or physical systems, all the points could just flush or turn into water or something like that, just to illustrate the thing you've been talking about.
So what was so magical to us about this is seeing these artists who work with code to make images every day being represented in the same material that they work with. So we've continued to push this idea, and we ran a Kickstarter, so they came out of the woodwork to help us producing this film. But I think more interestingly, or not necessarily more interestingly, but to my point tonight, is the support. I just finished a visit to Microsoft and met with the people who made the Xbox, and they were fascinated with the clip I just showed you. They loved it. They loved the fact that someone was taking a technology that they had intended for one thing and completely subverting it and making something else out of it. And they've actually started initiatives to do research in the line of the research I'm doing on my own, or on our own in our community. And I think that's where it comes to this idea of bulldozers and anthills, is that if you want to build something, you could take the Lockheed Martin approach and make something closed and just go for it and throw money at it. Or you could kind of take a more emergent route and think, you know, who am I in this field of ants? You know, I'm not a big person, and I'm not doing this alone. You know, am I Bruce Sterling? Am I imagining the future and kind of very eloquently talking about it? Am I a hacker, a tinkerer who's discovering new possibilities where, you know, they're sitting under people's noses? Or am I a person like at Microsoft that's recognizing and seeing what people are doing with the technology and not living in a bubble and actually supporting it financially and constructively. So I guess I want to leave you with that thought, as well as one last thought, which is, how can I get my hands on those unused cameras in the security system, in the subway system? And maybe if those were open source, what would we have? So thank you.